Hi, I'm Eleanor, and I discover letters left behind, letters that tell stories the world needs to hear. A few weeks ago, I received a package from the Morrison family in Massachusetts. Inside was a collection of letters, photographs, and a story so extraordinary that it took me several days to process the full impact of what they'd discovered. This story began 3 weeks after Margaret Connor's funeral, when her family finally gathered the courage to clean out her century-old Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts. What they found hidden in the attic would completely rewrite 60 years of family history and reveal one of the most heartbreaking love stories I've ever encountered. The Morrison family contacted me because they felt this story needed to be shared not just as their family's secret, but as a testament to the sacrifices people make for love, and the way truth always finds a way to surface, even decades later. This isn't just about a letter. This is about the choices we make for love, and the prices we pay to protect the people we care about most. Sometimes the greatest loves are the ones we can never fully claim. You've probably discovered family secrets that surprised you. But have you ever found something that made you question everything you believed about the people who shaped your life? Share your experience in the comments, because this story will show you just how deep family secrets can run. Margaret Elizabeth Connor lived in that Salem house for 73 years. The Morrison family told me their grandmother always said she had the most beautiful garden on Elm Street, roses that bloomed impossibly late into autumn, as if they understood her need for beauty in a world that had asked her to sacrifice so much. The house itself seemed to hold memories in every creaking board. Built in 1887, it had weathered hurricanes, housed 4 generations, and kept more secrets than most families accumulate in a lifetime. The narrow hallways were lined with photographs: Margaret as a young nurse in her crisp white uniform, her wedding day with Henry in 1965, grandchildren's graduations, holiday gatherings where she always stood slightly apart, watching everyone with eyes that seemed to hold untold stories. Sarah Morrison told me she and her cousin were sorting through Margaret's bedroom when they heard their Uncle Robert call from the attic. "You need to see this," his voice echoed down through the old house, carrying a tension none of them recognized. The attic smelled of cedar and old paper. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light filtering through a small circular window. Robert was kneeling beside a section of floorboards that had been carefully pried loose, revealing a hiding place that looked like it had been untouched for decades. Inside was a small wooden box, handcrafted with delicate dovetail joints. The kind of box someone makes when they want to preserve something precious forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. The contents took their breath away. Dozens of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Photographs of Margaret they'd never seen younger, radiant, laughing with a man who wasn't their grandfather. And at the bottom, a simple gold band that none of them recognized. Robert picked up the first letter with the reverence you'd show a historical artifact. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting, "My dearest Margaret." The postmark read July 15, 1963. The return address showed a name that meant nothing to them: Thomas Whitmore, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. "Who is Thomas Whitmore?" Sarah whispered, voicing what they were all thinking. Robert opened the letter carefully, the old paper crackling softly. He began to read aloud, his voice growing quieter with each word. "My beloved Margaret, I count the hours until I can see you again on our beach. Every moment away from you feels like borrowed time from a life I'll never be able to claim fully. You are the love I never expected and can never keep. But for these precious weeks, you are mine completely." The letter was signed simply, "Forever yours, Thomas." The family sat in that dusty attic in complete silence, processing what they'd just discovered. Margaret, their practical, devoted grandmother who had loved grandfather Henry for 40 years, had hidden evidence of another love entirely. A love that, judging by the passion in Thomas's words, had been anything but casual. Over the next hour, the Morrison family read letter after letter, piecing together a story that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The correspondence painted a picture of the summer of 1963, when Margaret was 23 years old and working as a nurse at Cape Cod Hospital. Thomas was a literature professor at a small college in Boston, spending his summer in a rented cottage near Provincetown. He was 32, married, with 2 young children back home. The letters revealed how they met on a crowded beach during a particularly busy 4th of July weekend, when Thomas helped Margaret tend to a child who had been stung by a jellyfish. "Your hands were so gentle," Thomas wrote in one letter that the family shared with me, "the way you calmed that scared little boy while treating his sting. I watched you and knew I was seeing something I'd been missing my entire adult life, real compassion, the kind that comes from someone who truly sees other people's pain." Their affair lasted exactly 2 months. The letters documented clandestine meetings on isolated stretches of beach, conversations about books and dreams that stretched late into summer nights, and the growing realization that what had started as attraction had become something much more dangerous. Margaret kept copies of her own letters, written in the neat handwriting the family remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists. Her words revealed a side of their grandmother they'd never imagined, passionate, conflicted, desperately in love with a man who could never be fully hers. "I know what we're doing is wrong," she wrote in late August, "but I can't make myself care about right and wrong when you look at me the way you do. For the first time in my life, I understand what people mean when they talk about finding their other half. You are my other half, Thomas. But you belong to someone else." The final letters from that summer grew increasingly desperate. Thomas was torn between his family obligations and his love for Margaret. Margaret faced an impossible choice that would define the rest of her life. The last letter in the summer sequence, dated September 3, 1963, contained news that changed everything. "My dearest Thomas, I need to see you one more time before you return to Boston. I have something to tell you that will affect both our lives forever. Please meet me at our usual place tomorrow evening. All my love, Margaret." But there was no response from Thomas dated after September 3. Instead, they found a Western Union telegram from September 15, formal and devastating. "Received your news. Cannot leave family. Will send money monthly. Please don't contact me directly. My heart breaks. Thomas." You can probably imagine what that telegram meant, but I have to ask you, if you were Margaret, 23 years old and facing an impossible situation, what would you have done? Would you have fought for the love you'd found, even if it meant destroying a family? Or would you have chosen the path that protected others at the cost of your own happiness? Let me know in the comments what you think, because Margaret's choice would affect 3 generations of this family. The next section of letters told a story that none of the Morrison family saw coming. Margaret had moved to Portland, Maine, in October 1963, taking a nursing position at Maine Medical Center. She lived under her maiden name in a small apartment near the Old Port District, where she could disappear into anonymity. The correspondence during this period was sparse but heartbreaking. Thomas kept his promise to send money, but his letters were formal, distant, as if he was trying to convince himself that what they'd shared hadn't been real. Margaret's responses were equally restrained, but between the lines, you could read her growing isolation and the physical toll of carrying this secret alone. Catherine Rose was born on April 12, 1964. Margaret documented everything about her daughter in letters she wrote but never sent, letters addressed to Thomas, describing their child's first smile, first steps, first words. Catherine had Thomas's dark eyes and Margaret's stubborn chin. She was, by all accounts, a remarkable child, bright, curious, already showing signs of her father's love of language. But the social pressures of 1964 were unforgiving to unmarried mothers. Margaret's landlord discovered her situation and evicted her. The hospital where she worked made it clear that her continued employment was in jeopardy. Even in progressive Maine, a single mother faced stigma that could follow her for life. The most difficult letter for the family to share with me was dated October 20, 1964. Margaret had made an unbearable decision. "My dearest Catherine, you will never read this letter, but I need to write it for my own sanity. Tomorrow I am taking you to Sacred Heart Adoption Agency in Boston. I am giving you to a family that can provide what I cannot: respectability, security, 2 parents who can love you openly. I am not abandoning you because I don't love you. I am letting you go because I love you too much to let my choices limit your possibilities." The adoption was handled through Catholic Charities. Margaret received 1 photograph and a brief letter 6 months later, confirming that Catherine had been placed with a loving family in Western Massachusetts. After that, silence. Margaret returned to Salem in the summer of 1965. She met Henry Connor at a church social, a kind, stable man who worked at the naval shipyard and wanted nothing more than to build a simple, honest life with someone who would appreciate quiet devotion over grand passion. They married in September 1965. Henry never knew about Thomas or Catherine. Margaret buried that part of her life so completely that even Henry's closest friends would later say he'd been Margaret's first and only love. But Margaret kept every letter, every photograph, every document related to the daughter she'd given away. Hidden in that attic box were also legal papers showing that Thomas had died in a car accident in February 1975. He was 44 years old, a professor at Harvard by then, still married to his original wife. I want to take a moment here to thank those of you who've been following my stories and sharing your own experiences in the comments. Your support means everything as I share these difficult family revelations. Family secrets have a way of connecting us all, don't they? The Morrison family felt the same way. They wanted this story shared because they knew others had walked similar paths. The discovery in Margaret's attic was just the beginning. David Morrison, who works in genealogy research, became obsessed with finding Catherine. Using the limited information from the adoption papers and some creative detective work through public records, he traced Catherine Rose to a family named Morrison, coincidentally sharing their surname in Springfield, Massachusetts. Catherine Morrison, she'd kept Rose as her middle name, was 60 years old, married, with 3 grown children of her own. She worked as a librarian at Western New England University, specializing in American literature. The irony wasn't lost on the family that she'd built her career around books, just like the father she'd never known. David's initial research revealed that Catherine had lived her entire adult life just 50 miles from Salem. She'd attended Margaret's church's annual holiday bazaar twice in the 1990s. They might have passed each other on the street, walked by each other in grocery stores, never knowing they were mother and daughter. The most heartbreaking discovery was that Catherine had been searching for her birth family since she turned 18. She'd registered with multiple adoption reunion services, provided DNA samples to genealogy websites, and even hired a private investigator in the 1980s. But the records had been sealed so thoroughly that no one had been able to connect her to Margaret. The family debated for weeks whether to contact Catherine. Was it fair to disrupt her life with information that might bring more pain than comfort? Margaret had taken this secret to her grave. Maybe she'd intended it to stay buried forever. But Uncle Robert found something in the very last letter that changed their minds. It was dated just 3 months before Margaret died, written in the shaky handwriting that marked her final illness. If anyone ever finds these letters, please know that my greatest regret was never finding a way to tell Catherine that giving her up was the hardest thing I ever did, but also the most loving. I have prayed every day for 60 years that she was happy, that she was loved, that she somehow knew she was wanted. If there is a way to find her after I'm gone, please tell her that her mother never stopped loving her, and that her father was a good man caught in an impossible situation. Margaret had included detailed instructions for finding Catherine, along with a sealed letter addressed to my daughter Catherine and another addressed to Catherine's children, your grandmother's story. Now, I have to ask, if you were the Morrison family, would you have respected Margaret's apparent wish to keep the secret, or would you have followed her final instructions to find Catherine? This kind of moral dilemma happens in families all the time. What would you choose? Making contact with Catherine required careful planning. David worked with a professional reunion specialist who had experience with sensitive family situations. The initial approach was gentle, a simple letter explaining that they'd found evidence of a family connection and asking if she'd be interested in learning more. Catherine's response came within a week. She'd been waiting for that letter her entire life. The Morrison family arranged their first meeting at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Worcester, halfway between Salem and Springfield. Catherine arrived early, carrying a folder that she clutched like a lifeline. She looked remarkably like Margaret had at that age, the same determined jaw, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of tilting her head slightly when listening intently. I've imagined this conversation 1,000 times, Catherine told them after introductions were made. But I never imagined it would happen after she was gone. The family showed Catherine the letters, the photographs, the evidence of a love story that had shaped 3 generations. She listened with tears streaming down her face as they read Thomas's passionate words and Margaret's agonized responses. But Catherine had brought revelations of her own. She opened her folder and pulled out letters the family had never seen, letters addressed to Catherine Morrison with no return address, postmarked from various locations around New England. These started arriving on my 18th birthday, Catherine explained. One every year, always on April 12th. They never said who they were from, but they contained stories, memories, advice about life. I always suspected they were from my birth mother, but I could never prove it. The letters were in Margaret's handwriting. For 42 years, Margaret had found ways to stay connected to the daughter she'd given away. She'd followed Catherine's life from a distance, celebrating her achievements through these anonymous birthday messages. The last one arrived just 3 weeks before you contacted me, Catherine continued. It was different from the others. It contained an address, your grandmother's address, and a note saying, if you're reading this, it means it's time for the whole story to come out. Margaret had orchestrated this reunion from beyond the grave. Catherine also revealed that she'd inherited more than her father's love of literature. Among her possessions was a small package that had been left for her by her adoptive parents, items that the adoption agency said had belonged to her birth father. Inside was a manuscript Thomas had been working on before he died, titled Letters to the Daughter I'll Never Know. The manuscript contained Thomas's side of the story, his guilt over abandoning Margaret, his love for the child he'd never met, his regret over choosing duty over happiness. He'd written it as a way of explaining himself to Catherine, hoping someday she might understand the impossible position he'd been in. The final entry in Thomas's manuscript, dated just days before his death, included something that stunned everyone. I have set aside money in a trust for Catherine, to be released when she turns 65. It won't make up for a lifetime of absence, but perhaps it will help her understand that she was always loved, always remembered, always part of my heart. Catherine had never received that inheritance. The trust had been lost in legal complications after Thomas's death, but David's research had uncovered it. After 40 years of compound interest, it was worth enough to change Catherine's life completely. But more important than money was the reconnection. Catherine joined the Morrison family completely, attending holidays, sharing stories, filling in gaps in their understanding of Margaret's later life. Her 3 children suddenly had aunts, uncles, and cousins they'd never known existed. 6 months after their first meeting, Catherine stood in Margaret's garden in Salem, now hers by inheritance, planting roses that would bloom late into autumn, just like her mother had always done. "I spent 60 years wondering where I came from," Catherine told the family as she worked the soil with her hands. "Now I know I come from love, complicated, imperfect, sacrificial love, but real love nonetheless." This story that the Morrison family shared with me taught all of us that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. Margaret spent her entire life protecting others, protecting Thomas's family from scandal, protecting Catherine from the stigma of illegitimate birth, protecting Henry from the knowledge that would have hurt him. But love finds a way. Despite all the secrecy, all the sacrifice, all the years of separation, Margaret's love for her daughter never died. And in the end, it was that love that brought them all together. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Could you have made the sacrifices she made for love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This story proves that family is sometimes found in the most unexpected places, and that the letters we keep can tell the most important stories of all. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more real family stories that explore the complexity of love, loss, and the secrets we keep to protect the people we care about most. Your support helps me continue sharing these profound human stories that remind us we're all more connected than we think. I'm Eleanor, and I discover letters left behind, letters that tell stories the world needs to hear. This Morrison family story shows us that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that take 60 years to fully unfold. Until next time, remember that the truth has a way of finding the light, no matter how carefully we try to hide it.